Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
We use this time to introduce ourselves to each other. My name is Hubbard.
Mike. George. Michael.
Lee. Kay.
Michael. Bill.
Michael. Carl. My name is Jim.
Snake. Will.
I'm Bob. Mark.
I'm David.
Jack. Paul.
Paul. Bill.
David.
Peter. Buzz.
Steve. Don.
Lee.
And Roger.
Yes, Michael has introduced himself. Well, good morning to you, Roger. It's great to have you present to us the Dharma this day. I remember a month ago when Jim Wilson had his concluding talk, he was talking about the different types of teachers within Buddhism, how a student aligned themselves with a particular teacher. And one of the categories he spoke of quite lovingly with the name Roger Corless associated with it was the scholar. And certainly we honored that gift that you bring to this morning.
So that means there'll be a test afterwards, be a quiz, and if you fail, you have to go to my room. Good morning. It was pointed out to me, I didn't realize until it was pointed out to me that today is Pearl Harbor Memorial Day, the day that the president of the day proclaimed that it would live in infamy. Whether it really does live in infamy is up to history to decide. But it seemed to me that then it would be appropriate to talk of Buddhist attitudes towards enemies and friends. So I guess the topic of the day will be enemies and friends. I was just asked before I started if I would open it up to questions. I'll try to open it up to questions at the end, but I did have this topic in mind, which I think is appropriate. And if you'd like, now that we don't have Jim Wilson around, I guess I don't want to say I fill his shoes or sandals or zori or something, because we are very different. But I would be open to the idea of coming one Sunday and just saying whatever you want to ask, and we'll go with that rather than having a set topic. So facilitating open discussion. But today I want to talk of enemies and friends, and focus my attention on discussion of this in the Bodhisattva Shantideva's text called The Practice of the Bodhisattva. This translation doesn't actually translate I guess it doesn't translate the text. It just calls it the Bodhicharyavatara, which is the Sanskrit name for it, the practice of the introduction to the practice of bodhi or enlightenment. The Tibetan translation is a little more precise, and it calls it the introduction to the practice of the Bodhisattva, is really what it is. And it's a text which is quite short by Buddhist standards, but extremely profound. And it's something that actually, if we wanted to think of some kind of ongoing series of talks or a study session, we could do something with it. I'm not a specialist in the text. It is something that is I would have to do some more study to get into it. we couldn't do the whole of it, but it has a lot to say about a lot of different things in very straightforward language. I'll quote first from the. If I can see that light is not as good as I would have hoped. The chapter on, it calls it here in this translation, on forbearance. The Sanskrit word is kshanti, meaning patient acceptance, almost in a sense one could call it serenity in English, just allowing things to be what they are and not trying to get rid of them, to fight them, get on to the next thing, sort of acceptance of the way things are. And he has a lot to say about that. And in verse 107, the original is in verse. This translation is in prose, which is a fairly good decision, because when you try to put Sanskrit poetry into English, it's disastrous. So just try it in English verse. Since this is the enemy, since the enemy helps me on the path, the enemy helps me on the path to awakening, I should long for an enemy, like a treasure discovered in the house, which is acquired without effort. Most of us, I think, would say, the one thing I don't want is enemies. Shantideva says, I would really be happy to have enemies because they're very helpful to me. Just before that, he talks of beggars or of the homeless, something which in the New Testament Jesus is represented as saying, you always have the poor with you, and it seems that even though now we have all this technology and we're so extremely modern and so forth, the homeless problem doesn't seem to have been solved. So we see them we see homeless people all the time. So some of us indeed may have been in a condition of being homeless. And so it's very easy to find a homeless person if we want to practice the virtue of giving. So the virtue of the practice of charity, of giving, is very easy. The practice of forbearance or patient acceptance or kindness and compassion is best practiced in the face of an enemy. It's really easy to be nice to friends. I mean, that's why they're friends, right? But to be nice to an enemy, that's really difficult. So we may think we're doing pretty well, and then something simple like if we drive, and actually I would say that if we want to inspect the way our minds are and how our practice is doing, we should have someone remark on our driving. We seem I think because maybe our ego expands to fill the car, and the larger the car, the larger the ego. And so we can see what the problem is. And why are these people on my road? Shouldn't there be a lane marked for Roger only? See? And these people are in my way, on my road, and they're coming and they're cutting me in. They think they're more important than I am. They have more important business than I am. And I'm going to get them. So we may feel we're doing very well until this happens to us on the road and they think, there's a problem here. So Shantideva asks us first to inspect where enemies come from, where enemy or hatred comes from. And he identifies hatred as the worst vice, if you like to put it in English, that most quickly destroys all the rest of our practice. I can't resist a little vignette on who Shantideva is. We don't actually know very much about him. He lived probably in the 4th or 5th century of the Common Era, probably in the southern part of the Indian subcontinent, and was probably a monk. That's about all we could know for certain. But a legend has built up some wonderful stories about him, and the one I like the best is that he received his inspiration, his teaching, directly from the Bodhisattva of wisdom, called in Sanskrit Manjushri. So he didn't have a human teacher, and he received these teachings at night. So in the daytime he slept, and so the other monks called him the monk of 3 attainments: the attainments of eating, sleeping, and defecating. And so they thought they were going to this lazy lout would be shown up. They'd show him up by asking him to give the Dharma talk on a major festival, and if he didn't accept, then he'd be shown up. But if he accepted, he'd just make a mess of it, they thought. However, he got on the high seat and he began to speak, and he spoke these wonderful Sanskrit verses, which became this text that we have, the introduction to the practice of the Bodhisattva. And having finished that, and it covers all the topics. It's one of these texts that if you really know the text intimately, you know most of Buddhism, except for the Tantra. It doesn't go into the Tantra, but most of it you can understand. And the Yogacara is a little bit not spoken of. He focuses on the Madhyamaka. But you'd know a lot of Buddhism if you knew this text really intimately. And having finished, he rose into the air and disappeared. So they thought, well, no, he was actually good. He was actually... You see that now. So, looking at the origin of evil, in the Buddhist tradition, the principle of evil is known by the name Mara, M-A-R-A. Most unfortunately, this is also the way you spell the name in the Irish language of a woman. It's a girl's name to be called Mara, and it happens to be no connection. But it often looks a bit odd when you say, "Well, this is my daughter Mara." Oh, really? So M-A-R-A, it comes from the same root as our word in English, mortal, or a mortician. Sanskrit and English are related. So actually, you know a lot of Sanskrit. You don't know you do, but if you know English, you know a lot of Sanskrit. At least the words. You don't know the intricacies of the grammar, which are extremely intricate. So Mara means to do with death, concerned with mortality and with death, and is identified as anything which is an obstacle to the path, and is taught in 2 ways, as external or internal. And the external Mara or Maras can be in the singular or the plural. In the story of the life of the Buddha, at one point, just as he gets towards enlightenment, he is attacked by Mara and his servants and his troops. The reason that is sometimes given why Mara does this is that he's going to lose people from his sphere of influence, and he's going to starve. It is said that Mara is a being who lives on a different kind of energy than we do in the human realm. We eat things like McDonald's stuff, and then or veggie burgers, I suppose I should say in this context. And from that, we convert the physical energy into physical and mental energy of our own. But Mara lives in a realm where he is able to feed on the mental energy directly. And the mental energy that he likes to feed on are the internal maras, which I'll come to in a moment, but any of the defilements, so anger, hatred, lust, and confusion, all those things he feeds on. And he gets to be more powerful that way. There was an incident in Star Trek, one of the real Star Treks, the old ones, where they have a real plot, although the special effects, are hokey, but they have a plot. And there's a story of the anger-eating demon who comes into the Enterprise, and he makes, unfortunately, there's Enterprise people, there's humans, and there's the Federation people, and there's the Klingons, and he makes them fight each other. And then they recover from their wounds, and they start to fight again. And they don't know why this is until Captain Kirk or Spock or someone probably Spock figures out that there's this little thingy that goes around, and it feeds on anger. And so the way they do is to start to love each other. Maybe it's a fake thing, because at that time the Klingons and the Federation are not really together. That comes in later episodes. But as a result, the thing sort of has to leave because it doesn't have any food. So it's a very similar thing in the Buddhist tradition, that if we feed our anger, we feed the demons. And whether one believes in an actual physical demon or a personal demon or not, I think it is obvious to us that if we feed on our anger and make it into a resentment, it gets bigger and more powerful. We can make our anger really big, and it'll overwhelm us. And Shantideva puts it well, that he says, when one full of hatred, one's mind finds no peace, neither enjoys pleasure or delight, nor goes to sleep, nor feels secure, while the dart of hatred is stuck in the heart. So that's an excellent picture of resentment, that we can't sleep, we obsess about the thing, we have no rest, and it destroys everything. It says here, even people that are friends or relatives, when they get like this, we don't want to be around them. So this is represented in the life of the Buddha as an actual entity who has he has his armies who come and try to destroy the Buddha by their weapons, and the idea is that they're going to unseat him, because the story is that all the Buddhas get enlightened by sitting in a particular place under a particular tree, and if you're just at the right point in the fruiting of your karma, and if you sit there for long enough, you will become a Buddha, all of you, all of us. And so the point is, Mara thinks this is really going to be bad for him. He must unseat the Buddha, throw him off. So the Buddha then says, I must stay here. He says, I will stay here, and and until the flesh rots from my body, if that has to be. And then he looks at the armies of Mara coming toward him as really fierce demons or soldiers with they have arrows and swords and spears. Today they may have much larger weapons and nuclear weapons and so forth. And he puts forth thoughts of loving kindness. He's patient, doesn't move, and puts forth loving kindness, which is the antidote, or the pratipaksha, the opposite wing of this. And the story is that as the fiery darts and all the weapons come towards him, they transform into flowers and fall at his feet and become an offering. Now, that tells us that if we are attacked in this way, we can remain unmoved, remain centered in the true state of our mind, and we can put forth thoughts of loving kindness, and we should find that it'll mitigate the hate or the fear. We may not have as much success as the Buddha did, but we should have some success in that way. Also, it's not said so much in the story of the Buddha, but it's explained in a later tradition. When these attacks come to us, we look at the true nature of their existence and find that they don't have any inherently existing self. They're not inherently hateful. It's just it's just the coming together of causes and conditions in a particular way. It's not that this doesn't mean that there isn't any real danger, that there is a danger, we may be hurt by all of this, but it's not the nature of the universe to be hateful to us in this way. It is just the coming together of different causes and conditions, and given different causes and conditions, it would be us who would be the aggressor, and the other person would be frightened of us. So we can allow these things to dissipate, rather like seeing the world become like a fog. That can be a dangerous practice if it's taken too literally. In the Buddhist tradition, it's not taught that the world is an illusion. It is taught that the world really is there. This really is here, but it's not here ultimately. It's here because of causes and conditions. So this world is not, according to Buddhism, a dream. It is not an illusion, but it's like a dream or like an illusion, in that a dream disappears when the conditions change and we wake up. An illusion disappears when the conditions change. So when the conditions change, something else happens to us in this world, or when we attain to a different state of consciousness, then something else happens. The change occurs. So that means that we needn't take these things too seriously. They may still hurt us, but they'll go away. Eventually, it will go away. And also, where did it come from? The causes and conditions were things that were laid down in a previous life, or previous lives, or this life could be, but often in previous lives. That's why it's said we don't really know exactly why these things are happening to us. Sometimes we think, oh, why is this happening to me? I'm such a good and virtuous person. And I have to say that this is what I've been hearing from our administration, in this country. I have to say our administration, even though I have a British accent, I have become an American citizen. So I'm now able to make a civil protest, and I won't be deported back to England. I'll simply be put into jail like a real American. So it is something that I'm now hearing from our administration, and I was hearing, I guess, back in the days when Pearl Harbor. Why this happened to us? Because we in America are so virtuous. We're looking after the world. We're bringing the light of democracy into the darkness of the is it the Muslim world? Something, I don't know what it is. It's really so much like in my country of origin, where we were bringing the light of parliamentary democracy into darkest Africa, where, as I was told, they don't even wear clothes. This was some kind of accusation, but I have to remind them, but the weather is different there. In England, you want to wear clothes, but Africa, maybe you don't want to wear clothes. It's too hot. These things happen everything happens for a reason. In Buddhism, it's taught that if we examine something, we can find that it happens because of a cause or condition. It doesn't happen because of simple spite or fate, or because some kind of wrathful God decided it. But there's a reason. We don't always know what it is, but if we look hard enough, we can often find a good idea why it is this way. And I think we need to look at the history of our country and ask why were we attacked, and why are we being attacked in the way we are. Our history is not that of arriving in the new world and being sweetness and light to everybody and saying, let's get along with each other and share the land. And no. You know the history. You know it better than I did, because you did it in your high school. All I knew about American history was that, what I remember from my high school in England was that there were some plantations. We had some plantations over here, and then there was a war and we lost them. And I remember nothing more, really, of the history of the rest. It's sort of rather superficial. I even had to learn that there was a difference between the revolution and the Civil War, which I made that mistake in the presence of a Southerner, and he was quite distressed by that. Even to call it the Civil War was distressing. He called it the war between the states, and his mother referred to it as the late unpleasantness. So, when we can understand where these come from, it's like we have two analogies to this. It's like you have a friend of yours who then gets sick somewhere, maybe gets some sort of disease, or maybe you have an older parent who gets dementia. Hopefully not as much in these days, but in the not too recent past, we would have friends who would have HIV and it would progress to full-blown AIDS, and they would have dementia, and they would become very hateful and spiteful. But that wouldn't mean that we would say, well, I'm going to not talk to you now. We would say, well, they've changed, but I still love them, even though they're being not, because I can see why they've got to this condition. It's not their fault that they did this. The other thing is, it comes back from our own anger in the past. If we're angry with somebody, it comes back to us. The Buddhist view of reality is that it's something like a mirror. As we interface with the world, it comes back to us in the opposite. So if I rob, then I will have people who will rob from me. So I would think if I rob people, if I become the head of the mafia, however, something like that. I mean, I've always thought that if I really wanted to have a really important position, I'd try to become head of the mafia, but I don't have the right ancestry. It's just not going to work. But then I would be rich, because I'd have all this stuff. But unfortunately, it would come back to me in the previous life, that it would all be taken away from me, and I'd be homeless at some point. So this is like looking in a mirror. And if I look in a mirror and I put on an enraged face and I grimace and I scowl and I shout at my reflection in the mirror, it's really very much like what's happening to me when hateful things happen to me from other people, because it isn't really their anger so much as it's my anger from the past coming back to me. I'm shifting a little bit into the internal maras, and then I want to finish with that. The internal maras are, and it's spoken in the plural. The word mara can be used in the singular, and in English with a capital M for the entity like a demon, who is Mara, by the way, is not really very much like the Christian Satan, although there's been a couple of books trying to compare Satan and Mara. I remain somewhat unconvinced by the comparison. They seem to be quite different entities to me. But then the Maras with a small m are any kind of obstacles to the path, and they're sometimes called the daughters of Mara or the army of Mara, and they are normally identified as being three, or as three groups. And the Sanskrit words, which I still have to use because we don't have English equivalents which really are agreed upon by everybody yet, they are raga, dvesha, moha. Raga is attachment which is passionate and sort of an addictive, a passionate attachment, sometimes translated as lust or greed. And dvesha is the opposite of that, a kind of an addictive or very, very, very strong revulsion, translated sometimes as hate. And raga and dvesha are opposites from each other. Raga is, if I don't have this, I'm going to be very unhappy and I will die. And dvesha is, if I have that, I'm going to be very unhappy and I'm going to die. And the root of the two is a moha, which is confusion or befuddlement, thinking that there is, in fact, something which will make me finally happy within this cyclic existence, or finally unhappy, when in fact, because everything is constantly changing and has no inherent existence, there isn't anything which will make me finally unhappy or happy or unhappy, although there are things that make me happy or unhappy for a certain amount of time, or they don't make me happy or unhappy, but I can react to them in that way. So it's within these three internal maras that Shantideva identifies dvesha or hatred as the one that destroys our practice and destroys our all of the virtue we've built up the most quickly. It's the most disastrous of the emotion. It's not lust, you'll all be happy to hear, but hatred. That is the one that really destroys all our practice. And so to tie this all together as to how it fits with how we might reflect on Pearl Harbor Day, we notice how how things have changed from being enemies to friends, to enemies to friends. I know when I was being brought up in England, of course we had the war. I was born in 1938, so very soon after that, war broke out between Britain and Germany. And it happens that in English, the word German and the word germ sound very much the same. And to a little boy, I thought they were connected because we had to get rid of both of them. And they were intrinsically bad. Germs are Germans. And I would do imitations of Hitler in English and so forth, and people would all clap and so forth. And then all of a sudden we had peace. Peace broke out, and we had butter and coffee and bananas and electric lights in the streets, and very strange. And then the Germans were all right. Apparently Germans were still bad, but Germans were okay. And then the same thing for the Japanese. At Pearl Harbor Day, Japanese were obviously intrinsically evil. And then they became friends, and now then they were far better at making motor cars than we are in the US. So now they're enemies in a different kind of way. But nevertheless, they're part of, in the big monetary situation, the US, and they're supposed to be good, even though the economy went down, it's supposed to keep coming up again. And so they're sort of friends. And then, so we cannot identify anybody as friends or enemies. We seem to do a more consistent job with the Muslims, which I'm afraid we tend to accuse all the Arabs. We say all Arabs or Muslims. Now, this is not a part of the talk because it's getting into Islam, but I hope nobody in this room identifies Arabs and Muslims. Some Arabs are Muslims, some Muslims are Arabs, and that's about as far as it goes. Most Muslims are not Arabs. Many Arabs are Christian, or what they call Arabs. When I was living in North Carolina, they call them Arabs. So we do a more consistent job trying to accuse this kind of people who are darker skinned and maybe Arabs, even though they're actually Sikhs or something, as the bad things, because they have stuff we want. Like they had the perfumes in the Middle Ages, and now they have the oil. And that's our oil, you see. It's really strange. Somebody said to me, isn't it strange that our oil got under Iraq? I wonder how that happened. Yes. So, what we're recommended to in this case then is to cultivate our own forbearance or patience and loving kindness, to inspect our own tendencies to attachment, aversion, and confusion, and to purify our own minds in that way. And it comes right down to the quick summary of Buddhism in the Dhammapada, where the Buddha says not to do evil, to do good, and to purify the mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. All right, we have some time for questions, maybe?
Maybe one.
Maybe one question. Make it a good one. Good to ask if this is one important question. Well, it doesn't have to be all that important. It could be less important.
It's such a thorough presentation.
Well, isn't Mara, isn't that like where we get our word nightmare? There's a Celtic word. I can't remember.
I don't know. I don't know the Celtic language.
And it may be related to...
It might be, yes, because there is a connection even in the Celtic. It's still part of the Indo-European group, so there still could be, Indo-European family, there still could be. Does anyone know the Irish language? I don't know a word of it myself. Not a word of it. Yes.
Can you recite or can we join in when we finish in the metta ritual?
I don't know the Metta Sutta by heart, but I always try to say something that is something like that, yes, at the end. Yes.
Can you just say what the Metta Sutta is?
Oh, the Metta Sutta is a small, it's a short text. It's only like a page or two long in an English translation, which expresses the intention to spread thoughts of metta to all living beings. Metta is the Pali form of the Sanskrit Maitri, so sometimes you might have heard of that word. and it comes from the root mitra, meaning friend. So it's a kind of love. English is very impoverished in words for relationships. Maybe that's why we have so much problem because we say, someone says, I love you, and the most sensible reply to that is, I have no idea what you mean. Will you be more explicit? Because we can love God and chocolates and movies and parents and children and friends and people in bed and so forth. So love is a very strange word. So, but metta, maitri, means friendliness, treating another person as a friend, which would normally imply we're equal, I want the best for you, and we don't have sex. That's normally what's implied in that word, amitra. There's no, so the idea of seeing all beings as one's friends and putting out thoughts of friendliness to them. And it lists different kinds of beings in case you can't think of them on your own.
Every day at noontime.
Pardon?
Every day at noontime in the San Francisco Zen Center, they recite them. They have a service.
They do? All right. I didn't know that. Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, Roger, I think as we close today, it'd be nice if you can offer us a metta salutation.
Yes.
For our closing time together. Anyone here for the first time to Gigler's Fellowship? Welcome. Your name again?
Paul Brown.
Paul, it's good to have you this day. Announcements from the Sangha.
Yes, okay. I'm the host this morning, and again, I'd like to also welcome the newcomer and people who be relatively new. We will have refreshment, some cookies, and also feel free to make tea using water in the pot. And after you use the cups, please wash them and put them back away on them, which is over the sink. And also, next to these, you will see Dana Bowl. That's where we ask our participants to put in $5. That's a sort of standard amount, but if they can put in more, please do so. If you can't, put in whatever you're doing so. But that will support our activities and allow us to continue releasing this space and having the programs that we've been having. So we would appreciate that very much. Again, thank you for coming.
And there's often, after that, there are people who get together for lunch. Sometimes, doesn't always happen, but it seems to arrange itself. That people get together for lunch if you'd like to join us.
And did I overhear you saying you were treating this day?
It must have been my brother who said that. So there's a lot of people who look like me. I was on the plane to Atlanta, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're a pastor in Berkeley, aren't you?" I said, "No." "But you've been to Open Door." "I don't know what that is." "But you've been to Fort Benning." "I don't know where that is." "Well, you definitely are a pastor in Berkeley." I said, "Oh, I didn't think I was." I'm mistaken for everybody. But I'm not myself.
Hi, today is our bi-monthly newsletter mailing, and normally we would have, we do have a much reduced hard copy list to mail out, but we also have a separate task today, which is to send out our annual mailing, our annual fundraising letter, which is a separate envelope and stamping and labeling. So there's, I think, a good amount to do, and people can volunteer after Team Cookies every day.
Other announcements? Just two real quick ones. I'm aware that Clint Sider has been in contact with the artist, and our request of the artist to commission the development of an altar as a gift to Jim Wilson has been engaged, and the artist will begin the work when that task is completed, when that piece of art is completed. We're in coordination with the steering committee would arrange a time for Jim to return, and the Sangha could use that opportunity to present the altar as our gift to him for his work in our midst over the last number of years. And also, I just yesterday saw a spectacular film. It's at the Rafael Theater. I highly recommend it to you. Titled Tibet. The subtext, I can't quite remember specifically. Snow lion something. The Cry of the Snow Lion. And
It's an excellent movie.
excellent documentary.
I'd like to say it was at least last week, because I saw it last week as well. Playing in San Francisco at the Opera Plaza. It's tiniest little theater. I saw it with two other people in the audience, so it was kind of interesting. And it was at 9:30 at night, so it didn't bother turning heat, so it's a good idea to take layers of clothing. You get the feeling of being in Tibet as well.
It certainly speaks directly to some of the reflections that we heard this morning.
Yeah, I was playing in Berkeley for probably still.
And can we stand and hold hands and you offer a greeting, salutation for us?
When we spread thoughts of matter, we spread them to all directions in the universe, and normally, conventionally, 10, and you'll see how that works out today. May all beings in front of me be my friends. May all beings behind me be my friends. May all beings above me be my friends. May all beings beneath me be my friends. May all beings at the intermediate points of the northwest, the southwest, the southeast, the northeast, and beings to my left and to my right. May I regard all beings as my friends, and may I help them as best as I am able to be liberated from suffering. May all beings be separated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings be joined to happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings dwell in equanimity with those who are near and those who are far. May all beings find peace, joy, and freedom. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Grateful.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.